All right, Econ 43-1270. I hope you guys had a restful spring break. Please be sure that you are checking for updates on the midterm. I've had a few hitches that I'm trying to fix on that, but for the most part, everyone did fairly well. And check Blackboard for any announcements on that. So in terms of the video lectures, we're going to begin our midterm 2 material, which has to do with regulation and really financial crises. But in order to do that, what we have to do is we really have to go into a particular agent within monetary markets that I've alluded to a lot, but haven't sat down to explain, and that is the Federal Reserve. Now, I am assuming, or at least banking on a lot of you understanding how fiscal policy is made. Fiscal policy relies on Congress, the Senate, and the President of the United States, right? That is the taxing and spending policy that we have available to us if there is a financial crisis. What affects everyone on a day-to-day basis, though, that maybe a lot of you don't know so much about is the Federal Reserve and our monetary policy arm of any kind of stimulus or contraction policy. So with this video, what I want to do is get into the nuts and bolts of the Federal Reserve, how it's made up. Fair warning, guys, as with any kind of dealings with the Fed, this can get into the woods a bit on vocabulary and density. I'm trying to keep it down. That being said, I strongly recommend a cup of coffee or a cup of tea or some other choice caffeinated beverage to go with this. Because these lectures have a soporific effect. Now, if you want if you want something to help you go to sleep, well, then here we go. So let's start with the history of the Fed. And I promise if we can get through this, then you'll be good to go and you'll know more than probably 80% of the population about our monetary policy because 80% of people cannot stay awake through these kinds of explanations. So here we go. Let's talk about the founding of the Federal Reserve. First of all, important trivia here is that the Federal Reserve is not our first central bank. We have had two before this. Now, Bank of England has a long storied history that goes back, to the monarchies, right? Now, with the Federal Reserve, this is something new. This is something different. We have experimented with our central bank over the last 200 years. So that having some understanding of that history can be a good thing. The first bank of the US, which was set up by Alexander Hamilton of $10 bill and musical fame, was disbanded in 1811. We figured it was too political, right? It wasn't enough of a private bank. Disbanded in 1811. Now, the second bank of the US was seen as a little too private, right? Andrew Jackson vetoed this bank in 1836. And really, the story behind this one is it was seen as they weren't under the control of the US government enough. So we had Hamilton's Bank, which was a little too much into the federal government. And then we had the second central bank, which was a little too outside to the point where Andrew Jackson felt that it was captured by private interest. And you can look those up. Hopefully, I haven't mixed the two up, but there we go. We had one incarnation of this bank that was too political and one incarnation that wasn't quite political enough. So what I like to do is compare the Fed to a mixture of Mayor Quimby from The Simpsons and Scrooge McDuck from DuckTales, of course. And I'm using, of course, the classic. Well, I don't know how classic the 1980s were in terms of Scrooge McDuck, but there we go. That's the one I grew up with. So we have Mayor Quimby from The Simpsons. He'd vote for you, and Scrooge McDuck sitting in his giant vault of money. Now, this kind of ridiculous and snarky commentary aside, what I'm trying to get at is this idea of the balance of powers, a balance between a public institution and a private institution, much in the same way we try to balance the executive power of the federal government with the legislative power of the federal government, and of course, with the judicial power of, say, the Supreme Court. So the Federal Reserve Act, when it was written in 1913, was looking back on the history of central banking in the United States and thinking, okay, we need something, but what should this look like such that we have a balance of powers? And so in order to attain this, the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 divided this bank across the country. The ownership of the bank was decided to be within the banks that are found within that district. And this central bank would have certain benefits with the United States government, although not be a public institution. It's a quasi-public institution. It's kind of public, kind of not public. It's a bank with benefits. So again, we have this kind of balancing of the potential for power and the potential for corruption uh, by taking together some of the worst aspects of political banking and combining with the worst aspects of commercial banking. Much in the same way, again, the US government is about balancing those powers out. So some of the first people in power at the Federal Reserve, the first governor was George Hamlin. You can see how excited they were by the prospect of these jobs in their photos. And the first chair of the Federal Open Market Committee, which we'll talk about more, was Mariner Clay. The important aspect of the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 is written in the mission statement of the bank. The mission of the Federal Reserve System is to foster the stability, integrity, and efficiency of the nation's monetary, financial, and payment systems so as to promote optimal macroeconomic performance to the public, the U.S. government, and the financial community that is consistent with its mandate. This is what Milton Friedman and Anna Schwartz are going to critique the Fed for when they talk about the Great Depression in monetary history of the United States. When Milton Friedman gets up in front of associations in the 80s and 90s and talks about the Great Depression and says it's not a failure of banking, it was a failure of the Federal Reserve to act in accordance with its mandate. This is the sentence that Friedman and Schwartz are looking at, that the Federal Reserve has a mandate and it has a mission. Now, as a public institution, it is beholden to that mission, but it's also a private institution, so it has some flexibility. But as a private institution, the main goal of the Federal Reserve is not its own profit. The main goal of the Federal Reserve is to promote macroeconomic performance, price stability. Now, notice we haven't defined what that is, but of course, what I'm going to say is 2% inflation, right? As I've been saying all semester. So let's take a look at the divisions. The Federal Reserve is divided into 12 district banks headquartered in particular cities and one board of governors. So if you are into the Hunger Games, then now you know we are District 11, right, guys? Dallas Fed, that's us. So when we pay tribute, that's where we come from: New Mexico, Louisiana, and Texas. St. Louis Fed, you've been extensively using the Fred data set. That covers Arkansas, parts of Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, looks like Mississippi in there as well, and southern parts of Illinois. Kansas City Fed includes Oklahoma. So again, we have that kind of border between Oklahoma and Texas. Believe it or not, that competition also stems within the Federal Reserve, right, guys? We're not in the same district as Oklahoma. Sorry, guys, I'm from Oklahoma, so gotta make those Oklahoma, Texas jokes. So let's talk about our district here in District 11, Texas, Southern New Mexico, Northern Louisiana. District 11 has about 1,200 employees in Dallas alone. However, there are other regional branches in El Paso, Houston, and San Antonio. Now, notice that our district is broken up into sub-districts as well, with Houston, San Antonio, El Paso, and Dallas. You can see the borders of those on the map. Again, I say this not because this is something extremely important for you to know, but it's important for you to know how the Fed is broken down and how it works. In the same way, you guys probably should know who your congressional representative and state senator are. So along with that, we have our current Dallas Fed President, Lori Logan, who was appointed August 22nd, 2022. She was initially, before this, she was at the New York Federal Reserve as a vice president there and helped to drive a lot of the monetary policy decisions, helped to execute those decisions during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, I want to give you information on her because I want you guys to remember how the Federal Reserve is going to think. In the same way, hopefully, you understand what political party your representative belongs to, some of their history, and how they're going to see these decisions being made at a federal versus local level, and how they're going to respond to that. You guys probably should know, if you're living in District 11, Who is the Dallas Fed president, and how is she going to make these decisions? So she's originally from Versailles, Kentucky, bachelor's from Davidson College, and a master's in public administration from Columbia University. Oh, I should double check that. Maybe it's a master's in performing arts. No, I'm fairly certain it's public administration. Now, I've got some outdated information, which I'll pull up in a second. Well, no, let me go ahead and pull that up right now. With these slides, as I said before, I'm a lazy man, so some of this information has changed on the board of directors, but let's talk about who the board of directors who make decisions or help make decisions at the Dallas Fed are. Every district has a board of directors broken up into three groups: Class A, Class B, Class C. Class A represents the banks. In terms of our District 11, when I first made these notes, it was Kelly Barkley of Azona Bank from Wimberley, Texas, Robert Holsey from American National Bank of Texas in Terrell, and Joe Quiroga from the Texas National Bank in Edinburgh, Texas. Now, as I said, some of this has changed. So Dallas Fed, what I'm doing right now is Googling Dallas Fed Board of Directors. So guys, you can find this information on the web. They put that up. So there's our Class C. Who's our Class A? Mrs. Barkley still there. Mr. Holsey and Mr. Quiroga, everyone is still there from when I wrote those notes. The change is being, I guess, in the Class B, but let's move on then with our notes. Again, why am I putting these people up on here and these pictures? Just so you can see these are the people who are going to represent banks to the Dallas Fed. Remember, banks are going to be the owners of the Dallas Fed. The member banks hold ownership. So these people will be influencing these decisions. Now, as I'll get to in a minute, the Class A, they serve on the board, but they don't vote. We'll talk about that as to why they don't get a vote. All right, Class B should represent the public or really firms and industry in the area. At the time I made this, that would have been Cindy Taylor, Oil States International from Houston. So here we have energy, right? A big part of the Texas, Louisiana, New Mexico economy. Here we have someone representing those interests. We have Bernard Johnson from METI in El Paso, Texas. Sorry, I haven't done all my research, but I believe this was a tech company, tech becoming a bigger and bigger deal in Texas, of course. And then Gerald Smith from Smith, Graham and Company Investment Advisors out of Houston, Texas. So here we have finance. Now, I like to include this, so I'm glad I was a bit lazy because this one has changed. And I want to show you who would be within that Class B representing the public now. Pascal Desroches, Senior Executive Vice President and CFO at AT&T out of Dallas, Texas, telecommunications, big deal in Texas, right? You guys have seen, hopefully you've been downtown Dallas and seen the AT&T building there. This is a large part of our economy. He's representing those interests currently. Cindy Taylor there, still with Oil States International, and there is currently a vacancy right now in the Class B representatives, which I'm as of the recording of this on March 18th, I do believe they have filled that, but I haven't, I can't remember where I read that. So maybe the website's not up. Usually these vacancies get filled fairly quickly though. Okay, so let's move on. That's Class B representing the public. Class A represents banks. Class B represents the public. Okay, Class C should also represent the public, but this should be something a little bit different from the kind of representation of firms and corporations. This could be representation of consumers, could be representation of nonprofits, or perhaps there are other firms or industries that we wish to represent that we think have a big influence on Texas. So let's pull up our Class C currently. These are, now Class B are elected by member banks along with Class A. Class C are appointed by the board. So when we talk about that public interest, by the way, that's public interest that's being influenced by people who are in Washington, D.C. These people come from the Fed Reserve Board in Washington, D.C., or at least that is to say they get their job from that Fed Reserve Board in Washington, D.C. The board has decided it is important for them to be on this committee and on this board and represented. We have Thomas Falk, retired chairman and chief executive officer of Kimberly-Clark Corporation. Claudia Aguirre of president and chief executive officer of Baker Ripley in Houston, and Gary Kelly, executive chairman, Southwest Airlines, Dallas, Texas. So you can see where the decisions that are being made at the Dallas Fed are being influenced by this board of directors, right? Who are talking with the presidents, talking with other executives in the Dallas Fed, and helping to make decisions. There's also a non-voting federal advisory committee, Prosperity Bank shares, Houston, Texas, David Zalman, and this is not a voting position. However, it's important because then he's going to bring a bit of the banking sector in as well. So you can check these. If you wanted to go to branch directors, find out who is at the El Paso branch, the Houston branch, San Antonio, you see a large variety of people from across different industries in Texas, New Mexico, and Louisiana, although someone in my lecture class pointed out that they didn't see a whole lot of people from New Mexico and Louisiana. So I think there was one we saw. No, I'm afraid not. But oh, there we go. There we go. Carrie Mitchell from Las Cruces, New Mexico. It makes sense for El Paso if you've ever been there, the Tri-City border complex there, Las Cruces, El Paso, and Juarez. So, all right. Again, is it important you know every single person on this? No, what's important is that you guys see and understand where these decisions are coming from. And if you want more information, again, Dallas Fed provides this. If you want to know how these directors are chosen, what's their guide of conduct, what's their bylaws, this is all available online. You can take a deep dive into it if you want. So, all right. What does District 11 do for us? Well, they establish the discount lending rates. So if Amarillo National Bank needs an emergency loan, the Dallas Fed is going to provide it, and the District 11 will determine that discount lending rate. But also District 11 will decide the member banks, who is going to be included in the ownership of the Federal Reserve. So if Amarillo National Bank wants to be within the Fed system and get access to any potential stimulus or discount lending, then they have to play by the rules of the Fed, because District 11 is going to decide whether they're included in that or not. One of my previous assignments for this class was talking about Four Corners Credit Union, which is a credit union in the state of Colorado that specializes in lending to marijuana dispensaries. They wanted to be part of the Kansas City Fed system. The legal problem is that being a credit union that loans to marijuana dispensaries is perfectly legal under state law in Colorado, but not perfectly legal in the state of Missouri, where the Kansas City Fed is located. That became a court case. Didn't get to the Supreme Court, got up to the appeals court, and I doubt it's going to go any further than that. They select the Federal Advisory Council, and the president will vote at the Federal Open Market Committee, which is going to be that large decision-making meeting in terms of interest rates and inflation. All right, still recording, still recording. We're doing fine, guys. You can do this. Oof. Sorry, that's more for me than it is for you. What else does the district do? They clear checks. If I write a check from, say, my bank, I like USAA. Let's say I'm banking with USAA, and I write a check to a colleague paying them back for something, and they bank with Amarillo National Bank. Well, Dallas Fed, as a centralized ledger, is going to keep tabs on, okay, well, this went from this bank, that went to this bank. This is the plumbing of the financial system. This is the plumbing of the banking system, is the Federal Reserve clearing and verifying these kinds of transactions. They'll issue and withdraw currency, administer discount loans, evaluate expansions and mergers with banks. If Happy State Bank is being bought by a bank that is located within the Atlanta district, then both the Atlanta Fed and Dallas Fed have got to be in on that decision in terms of what's going on with regulation, and perhaps maybe if there's too much monopoly power going on. They'll gather and disseminate data on industry. They'll regulate and examine banks. And my personal favorite, they hire macroeconomists. Awesome. Anything that keeps my wages up, I am hugely in favor of that. So there's my bias, but let me go ahead and put this up, guys, because if you're looking for a good job, Fed is a pretty good job. One, because you get those government health benefits. It's a quasi-public institution, but you don't get the government salary cap. Remember, as a federal worker, they have a salary cap that's generally changed year to year, but 183,000 was the salary cap in 2022, right? The Federal Reserve does not participate in this salary cap. So you are working or you're working adjacent to the government and getting the benefits of that without getting the salary limits on that. So I gotta say, the Fed's a good gig if you can get it. And remember, they employ 1,200 people in Dallas alone. So be sure you're checking that Fed Careers website and seeing if there's anything that might. If you're doing computer information systems, by the way, now's a really good time as the Fed is really interested in what's going on in blockchain. So we'll talk about that later in the semester. That being said, here's the 2023 Federal Reserve salary structure. So nice range of payments on there. I would say undergrads probably come in at the FR 16, 17 level, master students around the 21, 22. I'm not saying you have to have a PhD or JD to come at 27, 28, but that's usually about their entry into the Fed, at least as far as I know and what I've been talking with people about and hearing from them. However, Forbes magazine in 2021 did do an in-depth look at Federal Reserve salaries, and basically, they're not hugely transparent on what a lot of the higher ups are making on that. So keep in mind, if you work at the Fed and work your way up, the sky is the limit here. This is not like working at Treasury and then, hey, you hit your salary cap because you are a government worker in Treasury. With the Fed, you are a Federal Reserve employee. And so that is something a bit different. This video has already gone long, as I can see. I am, if you can tell from my blinking here, I'm going to need to take a caffeine break here, and we will go into more detail on the FOMC in the next video. All right, let me find the button. There we are.